everybody, to serving as leader, effective leadership in small congregations. I'm the Reverend Sarah Schur, and I am one of the field staff serving the Pacific Western region of the Unitarian-Universalist Association. The Pacific Western region goes from Denver to Honolulu, Fairbanks to San Diego. It's a big place. And the six of us on the Pacific Western region field staff team all have congregations where we are the primary contact, but we also have specialties that we carry. And one of my specialties is small congregations. Some of that is because I served as a lay leader in small congregations before going into the ministry, where then I served small congregations as minister, often being the first minister that those congregations had ever had. So it's delightful to get to be with you today, talk about leadership in small congregations. I truly believe anytime we gather together in religious community, we should light a chalice together, whether that be to get together for a board meeting, a webinar like this one, or even just to plant some flowers around the churchyard. Because when we gather together to do the work of our faith, we're doing religious work. So the classic chalice lighting for today is, let your little light shine, shine, shine. Let your little light shine all around. There may be someone in the valley trying to get home. I have three sources for today's webinar: Serving with Grace, the In-Between Church, and Serving Congregations in Anxious Times. Serving with Grace and Serving Congregations in Anxious Times, they are both available from the UUA bookstore. Serving with Grace by Eric Wickstrom is my go-to text for things like how to help with volunteerism and how to help people feel engaged in their congregation. Serving Congregations in Anxious Times is a wonderful resource for congregational leaders when there is upset and anxiety in the congregation because things are changing or there's something going on. The In-Between Church by Alice Mann, unfortunately, is a classic text that's no longer available in the bookstore, but there's a lot of information on church size dynamics on the UUA webpage. So if you go to the UUA webpage, you can find a lot of information on small church, large church, medium-sized church dynamics. People often have concerns about what it means to be a leader as a Unitarian Universalist. There are people, I heard this once said at General Assembly, that as a religious movement, we have not been so terribly successful, but boy, as a support group for people with authority issues, we are nonstop. Take the cake. I think that's because so many of us have confusion about what leadership means. They somehow think that leadership means you have power over other people, or that you're somehow dominating, or you're on a force of oppression. Well, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about being a servant leader which is classically called first among equals. And in that case, a servant leader's job is not to dominate people or to tell them what to do, but to help the team work well, to help you get the job done together, working as well as possible, rowing in the same direction. We believe in the democratic process in our congregations, and leadership is a role and an important duty that if you're elected by the congregation to do a job, then when you leave, you are doing the work they've asked you to do. If you're a minister who's either called by the vote of the congregation or affirmed in your contracted role as a congregation, if you're a member of the board, you've been elected by the congregation, or if you're in some other capacity that's been appointed by a body like the board who was elected, you are doing the work people have asked you to do. Because good leaders will delegate. So if you're delegated by the board to do a job, that's the democratic process. And if you're serving as an elected leader, that's the democratic process too. You're doing the work the people have asked you to do. Leadership is a skill. Some people play the piano. Some folks teach RE. Our friend here, the plumber, he has a very important job around the congregation, making sure everything works with the plumbing and the building. But leadership is a skill too. And this is a skill that is important to a congregation to help things work well. And one of the wonderful things about leadership skills is they can be learned, like playing the piano or doing plumbing. Learning how to be a leader is something you can do. I want to begin by thinking about who is your leadership hero. Think about someone who's a great leader that you'd like to be like, someone whose leadership inspires you, that you can use as a role model. It can be someone out of history. It can be a fictional character from a book or a movie, or a real leader that you have known and experienced in your life. So let's take a minute and just reflect on who is your leadership hero.
People wherever she went, and she really stuck with her principles, and she had the challenge of leading not from a position of power. She had to use her influence to make things happen.
Discerning the difference between power and influence. They both have a really important role. Anybody, I don't know how many Vashonites we have there. Are there some others?
Yeah, just one other. This is Paul. And so I was thinking about Barack Obama because I was thinking about him all day today also. And I use the same word, grace, but also thinking about his humor, his inclusion, and clarity.
Mm-hmm. Clarity. That's a really important aspect of leadership as well as humor. How about some of our people we've got people from far away. We've got people from Maryland. Are any of you on tonight? Some wonderful leadership hero qualities: humor, grace, being able to put all our personal feelings aside, using influence sometimes as well as actual authority, being able to take things in stride even when it's really hard. Heard some wonderful leadership characteristics. Well, I'm going to share with you guys who my leadership hero is. And that's Ernest Shackleton. In 1914, the Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton set out to cross Antarctica, but his ship, which was named the Endurance, became trapped in the ice and was crushed. And Shackleton and his crew had to abandon ship out there in the ice floes in Antarctica, and they spent 2 years walking over the ice and navigating in lifeboats and camping along frigid coastlines, waiting for rescue ships. Shackleton, who was called by his people the boss, kept his men going through everything from insisting on the routine and regular haircuts to morale-building sled dog races. And Shackleton even gave his mittens to the company photographer when the photographer had lost his. And if you can imagine being in Antarctica without mittens, that's a serious sacrifice. Well, after a couple of years lost in Antarctica, they were finally rescued through a lot of effort and a lot of hard work, and all but 3 men returned home safely. And a lot of people believe that it was Shackleton's strong and creative leadership that is what kept these people alive and moving forward for so long. So that's who I look to as my leadership hero, someone who was able to really, in a very, very much of an emergency situation, pull it together and keep people alive and keep things moving forward. Well, congregations have emergencies too. There are hate crimes that happen in congregations. People, spray graffiti on the walls, or somebody is attacked. There are natural disasters, hurricanes, floods. There's a picture here of a church on fire. I've known 2 different congregations just in the state of Oregon that burned to the ground during my lifetime. And as we all see in the newspapers, there are sometimes congregations where the children are abused. These are terrible emergencies that call on very strong leadership to get them through these times of trouble. But the more typical challenges that face a congregational leader, you guys face every day. Someone painted a new color on the walls in the coffee room. The joys and sorrows have changed, or maybe even gone away. Or there are lots of new people that are unfamiliar. Or one of the difficult ones, staff turnover. You might think that painting the colors a different wall because a different color wouldn't be such a big deal, but you remember that back when Mabel painted the coffee room blue because it looked so pretty and Mabel really liked that. But then now somebody's come and painted it a yellow, and even though the new people are all saying, well, the yellow is so cheery and it looks really nice, but sometimes people feel like that's just an insult, and people who didn't know and love Mabel don't know why it has to be blue. These are the kind of crises that you guys have to deal with all the time. These kinds of changes, normal changes in a congregation, bring about such anxiety. People can sometimes lock horns. Factions can form in your group, whether it be the new members or the longtime members or the humanists and the pagans or whatever it is. Anger and blame can start to come up. We have a budget shortfall because of those people. If there's a lot of anger and blame, sometimes people who don't want to live in the middle of conflict will distance themselves and maybe even leave the congregation. And during times of change, folks get rigid about little things that you wouldn't think would be important, like where do you put the flowers on Sunday morning, or what time the office is open on Friday. They seem like very big things all of a sudden. And what happens to every system, what is quite normal, is that there'll be a change back reaction. People get nervous, so they want to go back to what they knew. Even if what they knew wasn't working, even if the old way didn't necessarily work, when there's tension at a time of change, people's automatic reaction is to still want to go back to the way it was. Well, this is where good leadership helps. Because like with Shackleton's crew of the Endurance, a skilled leader is there to set the people toward a right path, towards safety, by kind of setting a tone that's calm, compassionate, and move people forward. And I hope that that's what you've come here to this webinar to learn how to do, is to set a tone that allows people to move safely forward in the life of the congregation. The most important thing a leader can be is a non-anxious presence. Not everything is an emergency. You have to be able to be brave in the face of those change back reactions. Confront inappropriate behavior in a fair and non-reactive manner. If you see somebody giving somebody else a hard time about why did you put the flowers there, you can talk to them about how your covenant calls on you to be with each other. You can explain why a decision was made the way it was, but you can do so in a fair and non-reactive manner, as opposed to just yelling back when somebody's upset. But also when people are upset, they need to be comforted sometimes. Comforted about the fact that it is hard sometimes to see change. The person who's upset because the walls are yellow, maybe they really miss Mabel who painted them blue, and need to talk about that for a minute. But truly, the leader needs to be the face of no drama. A non-anxious leader stays aware of the group dynamics. They pay attention to who's talking to who, or who suddenly you haven't heard from in a while, or who you're hearing a lot from these days. Aware, not dictated by, but aware. You stay emotionally engaged with people, even people who are unhappy, or what I didn't say here is unpleasant. It's very normal to want to distance yourself from people who are filled with angst or anger or frustration. But truly, you need to be able to stay in conversation with them as a leader without having their upset become your upset. So stay emotionally engaged while maintaining some perspective. Take your stands based on the facts, not based on anonymous rumor, and not based on, well, people seem pretty upset, but based on actual facts. And communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate about when the meetings are going to be, where you communicate about how the budget is going to go. Communicate about who's on the committee and what their charge is. Communicate about what was decided at the board meeting. A non-anxious leader lets people know what's going on when appropriate, which is most all the time. It's important that you have self-differentiation and boundaries as a person. Know what's your stuff and what's their stuff. Because as strange as it sounds, sometimes one of the problems that leaders get into is they start to kind of lose a sense of what they're upset about and what other people are upset about, and the drama kind of becomes contagious. Know when your buttons are being pushed. Again, that self-differentiation. Let's say you have a teenage daughter who's giving you kind of a hard time in the way teenage daughters can, and you're at a congregational event and somebody in the congregation gives you that same look your daughter gives you. And pretty soon you're tempted to yell at them and tell them everything you wished you told your daughter this morning. Be on the lookout for things like that. Be aware of where your own buttons are and make sure that they're tucked away and not getting pushed in the middle of congregational leadership moments. And avoid letting other people's trauma become yours. If somebody else is upset, you don't need to join them in their upset. You need to be compassionate and listen, but not necessarily join them in their emotional state. One of the things that happens a lot with congregational leaders is burnout. This can be a high burnout kind of activity. Some of the ways you can help reduce burnout is by setting clear goals and sharing them with others. Truly sharing your goals with other leaders so that you're not doing this all alone and you can work together as a team. The work we do is much too important to be done in isolation. So set clear goals as a team and share them with others. And be intentional in your interactions. This is not, congregational leadership is not a good time and place to be off the cuff and spontaneous. It is a good time to be intentional. And as I said before, don't try to do things alone. Work in concert with other leaders to avoid isolation and to make sure that you are maintaining your perspective. You can kind of keep an eye out for each other that way. You can also reduce burnout by keeping the mission always as your guide. Think about what your congregation's mission is. Are you there to be a group of like-minded liberals who get together for coffee? Are you there to spread the good news of Unitarian Universalism? Are you there to be a social justice force in your community? Some combination of the above? If you always keep your mission as your guide, then making decisions is so much easier, because if you're trying to decide things like, should we spend money on X or Y, you can say, well, does it further our mission? And if it furthers your mission, then it's worth considering some money. If it has really nothing to do with your mission and just has to do with somebody's private anxiety, then it's probably not the best use of your money. So if you keep the mission always as your guide in decision making, it helps reduce burnout. Know what is and is not an emergency. The building burning down, that's an emergency. Children getting hurt, that's an emergency. Someone's upset because you changed what kind of coffee you get, that's not an emergency. And I don't think that you will be happy if you let that feel like one. As easy as that is to do. And here's another one. Don't confuse confidential with secret. Let me give you a concrete example here. Let's say you have a janitor, and because of some problems in his work, you had to let him go. So the fact that the janitor had to be let go is not a secret. In fact, you should be frank and honest with the congregation that, Mr. Johnson is no longer employed as the janitor here at East Cupcake. The fact that the board made that decision in consultation with the minister, or whoever, what it was at your congregation that made the decision to let Mr. Johnson go, that's not a secret. However, as an employee, details that are inside the confidential personnel file, those are confidential. And even if everyone in the congregation wants to be in on all this and be all involved, it's wrong to share confidential personnel matters with the congregation. Those are confidential, and that's part of us being good and ethical employers. So again, it's not a secret that Mr. Johnson was let go from his position as custodian. Some of the details of why, that is confidential. Here's your new motto as congregational leaders in small congregations. Keep calm and be kind. Just got to keep that motto in your head. I think it'll take you a long way. There's another tool I want to point out to you. It's the Blake and Moten management grid. If anybody out there has a degree in business, you may have seen this before. It's one of those classic grids right out of algebra class. On the up and down axis, we have how concerned is the management for the people, how happy the people are, how fulfilled they feel in their work. That's one axis that the managers need to look out for. The other axis is production, concern for production. Are the jobs being done? Are they being done on time? In a factory, that may be how many widgets you produced that month. In a congregation, that might be, are there good quality worship services? Are you educating the children? Are you doing good social justice work in the community? Now, we've all known companies, possibly employers, who had a lot of concern for production and no concern for the people. And we don't speak nicely of those places. Those are bad employers. Sometimes we even boycott them. So as a congregation, we don't want to be more concerned about the production than we are the people. And we certainly don't want to be unconcerned about both. If you don't care about the people and you don't care about the product, well, then you're not doing much at all, and not a good plan. However, one of the traps some congregations get into is they care a lot that people are happy and feeling fulfilled, and don't care so much for that anything gets done. And that we sometimes call country club management. It's a really good way to have people feel like they're in a good country club where everybody's happy. But in the meantime, there's no good gatekeeping on how good the worship is. There's no good gatekeeping on how the children are being educated. And the other things the church produces aren't being looked to. The really good leader has a concern for both. They care about the people and they care about the product. So a really good team leader cares a lot about both how good the services are provided by the congregation, as well as how happy and fulfilled the people within the congregation are. So I guess the way I'd put it succinctly is, don't be a sweatshop and don't be a country club. Be a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Now this relates to membership and membership numbers. I've often heard leaders say, why do we get up to about 50 members, but we never seem to grow any bigger? I mean, people come to visit us. We have all these visitors. People seem to like it, but our numbers never seem to go up. Oh, we got up to 55 or 60, but then we just fell back down to 45. And they wonder what's going on. Well, the trick is, with growth comes change. You can't keep going the same way you were if you're growing. And as we talked about, change causes anxiety and calls for that good non-anxious leadership. Growth is a big change in congregations. Some of you might be familiar with these categories. A family-sized congregation, usually up to 50 people, it tends to run like a big extended family. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody's very close. There's a lot of intimacy. There may be one or two matriarchs or patriarchs who people look to make important decisions. And there tend not to be a lot of codified rules or procedures because we all just kind of know how it's done. In a pastoral-sized congregation, 50 to 150 people, there tends to be professional staff like a minister who is the hub of the wheel. Everybody, in a family congregation, everybody knows everybody really well. In a pastoral congregation, everybody knows the minister really well, and they recognize each other as acquaintances. But in a pastoral-sized congregation, the minister then becomes the hub of the wheel, working with various different departments of the congregation to see that things get done. And in a program-sized church, 150 to 400, that's when there's really more work than just the pastor can do in coordinating programs. Then you have more codified and organized committee structures and groups that are supervised by the minister doing some of the work, but the minister isn't doing all the work themselves. The example I often give is if you're sick and in the hospital, at a family-sized congregation, your friends will come to see you. In a pastoral-sized congregation, the minister comes to see you. In a program-sized congregation, a specially trained lay pastoral associate who works closely with the minister will come to see you. Alice Mann says that in order to break through any attendance plateau, a congregation must deliberately relinquish familiar patterns of behavior and begin to act as the larger congregations act. That means that if you want to be a pastoral-sized congregation and your little family-sized group is starting to get up to about 45 people, you need to begin to institute pastoral-sized structures so that when those new people come in, the structure will hold them. It's like you can't put a skyscraper on a chicken coop foundation or it will fall down. And the same thing is true with church dynamics and size. You need to have a structure that's big enough to hold the size of an organization that you have. These changes are hard. As a leader, your non-anxious presence and commitment to resisting that change back, it's really vital. Because growth is truly one of the biggest changes we have to face. So in that this is a webinar for small congregation leaders, your congregations are likely either going from family to pastoral or from pastoral to program. And the challenges are a little bit different in each one. Notice I've got a picture here of a tiny little church. This is talking about going from family to pastoral and what your tasks would be. They would be letting go of some of the intimacy of a small group. You know, in cheers where everybody knows your name, well, as your congregation moves from family to pastoral, you may have to give some of that up. You have to make clear policies based on roles rather than individuals. Instead of who opens the church on Sunday or who sets up the chairs, well, Joe always sets up the chairs. Instead, now it might be, well, the head usher sets up the chairs, and there might be a rotating schedule of ushers. And if Joe, for some reason, is sick, there's still somebody in mind to do that. It isn't based on one person who's just always taking care of that. You're going to have more written policies and job descriptions for things that happen, even for volunteer positions. And it's important as you make this fast family to pastoral change that you have appropriate professional staffing. Generally, you cannot make a shift from family to pastoral very well without a pastor. It doesn't have to be a full-time minister, but In a family-sized congregation, maybe there's a quarter-time minister who comes and preaches once in a while. But when you get up to pastoral, you need to have at least half-time, depending on the size of the congregation, and more if the congregation is a big pastoral. Well, the pastoral, the program task, you notice this church is a little bigger. When you move from pastoral to program, your big tasks are letting go of some of the intimacy you've had with your minister. When you moved from family to pastoral, you became very attached to your minister, being the helpful hub. Well, as you get bigger, the minister can't be in the middle of everything anymore. You have to give up some of that intimacy with them. You have to use specialized volunteer groups, people who are trained to do some of the work of the congregation that isn't just, well, whoever wants to do this does this. It's people who have special training, who are members, who are in special task force and committees. You have to find a way to connect people in subgroups. This is often where you come in with small group ministries or chalice circles, because just as with a family-sized congregation, people like to have a group of folks they know well. That's important to how human beings work, and it allows you to be a bigger congregation if you still find ways for people to connect in small groups. That could be things like singing in the choir, or it could be things like being in a covenant circle or small group ministry of some sort. And as you go from pastoral to program, you need to have even more increased clarity in your policies and procedures. Less and less flying by the seat of your pants, and more policy and procedures that people all can know and find and understand. Some of the waters you'll need to navigate as you do this growing are, what is the role of the minister? Are they there to do all the work? Are they there to organize committees? Are they just there to visit and help once in a while? What does the democratic process mean at your particular size and stage? In a congregation of 30 people, the democratic process may mean everybody gets together and decides together on a Sunday afternoon. But in a 150 people congregation, it might mean that the board or some committee is designated to make certain decisions on the congregation's behalf. And then there's who decides what, or my classic line of not only who decides, but who decides who decides. This is where we have a really useful tool. It's called the RACI. For any particular policy or decision you make as a congregation, it's important that you figure out who's responsible, who's accountable, who gets consulted, and who gets informed. So responsible means who is responsible for actually doing the work? Who is it that actually goes out and pulls the weeds in the yard? Who's accountable? Who is it that needs to see that the weeds get pulled, and that if they aren't pulled the way you thought they would be, has to kind of deal with that? Who is consulted? Who do you have to talk to before you go out and pull the weeds to make sure you're pulling the right weeds in the right places? And who is informed? We are going to go out and pull weeds on Saturday, or last Saturday we pulled some weeds. So for any particular task, whether it be weed pulling or something like writing a new mission statement for your congregation, it's important to have a good sense of who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. Well, the work of congregational leadership is hard, and I will tell you that the changes in size dynamics in all their wonders are some of the biggest and most important jobs a leader will face. So I just want to bring that up, that is hard and important work. So I ask that you try to be brave and kind while doing this work. And no matter what kind of stresses your congregation may be facing, try to avoid that change back reaction just to keep the peace. If you made a decision for a good reason and somebody's a little upset, well, it was probably still a good reason. Try to avoid changing back just to keep the peace, just to take things back to the way they were when everyone knew and understood. Last but not least, I'd like to encourage you to reach out. reach out. Reach out. If you're ministers, really reach to other ministers. And if you're a lay leader, reach out to the ministers who are in your congregation or nearby congregations. Reach out to other lay leaders. Reach out to leaders in other congregations, other UU congregations or other congregations in town who may be of other faiths. Reach out to us here on the UUA field staff. There's our webpage right there, uua.org/Pacific-Western. That's where you found this webinar and where you can find lots of other resources. And it also tells you how to get in touch with each of us. Ask for help and support when you need it, because you are not alone. As I always say, this work is too important to be done in isolation. And speaking of gathering together with other congregation leaders, I just want to do a shout out that anybody who's president of a congregation under 75 members got invited to a Survey Monkey from me the other day, because I'm thinking of putting together a Zoom discussion for those particular congregation leaders so you can get support and best practices from each other. Because sometimes you guys just know the work in a unique way that nobody else does. Well, I appreciate you listening and watching all the slides go by, and this would now be a good time for people to ask questions or hold up anything that confused them or that really resonated with them. So, Sarah, you can handle the hands.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised yet. You can also write in the chat if you would like to talk.
Oh, looks like Pocatello. Good old Pocatello.
Right, Pocatello. Pocatello, I unmuted you.
Thanks.
I'm going to go ahead and do a video so when I'm talking now that we can see each other.
I didn't get the Survey Monkey that you just mentioned, so if I could retry that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Making a note.
Thanks.
And I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is Jennifer. Yeah, maybe we should we put ourselves in the dark so we can see better. So we're going to turn the light on now.
Yeah.
You had some ideas of structures that one would try to put into place moving from family to pastoral. And among that is getting staff. And it seems like a sort of, I don't know, there's a sort of cart and horse thing going on here, or maybe it's a chicken and egg. If you're struggling and really what you ultimately want as a minister, but can't quite get there yet, can you imagine what those structures would be that you would put in place lacking a minister, put in place within a family-size organization to try to get that organization to launch itself toward that larger size?
Certainly. One of the things I do want to hold up is how often a congregation that can't have a minister all by themselves can yoke with other congregations sometimes and share. That's something that works a lot. And I think the most important thing is to do that, moving from having jobs be about people to jobs being about roles. Because oftentimes there's this sense of comfort. It's like, well, Joe always does that, and Joe will always do that. We always count on him. And people are even worried about, oh my gosh, well, if I ask somebody else, Joe will feel bad. And that's a good way to have things stuck and not be able to move forward, and to be able to have roles be about job descriptions and not about people. Which doesn't mean you don't care about Joe. Maybe, like I say, if Joe has always been the one who opened the building, and now you want to have it be the head usher opens the building, maybe you make Joe the head usher. But it does mean that Joe's allowed to retire someday, and other leaders are allowed to move in. I think that's the biggest thing. And also codifying the procedures a little bit so that, again, it's not like people who come in new have to know the secret handshake about how you get something in the newsletter. that it's very clear to everybody who's brand new or people who might not have ever tried to schedule a meeting before. It's very clear how that's done and easy to find. So those are some of the other structures you can do in addition to getting staff. Did that help?
Yeah, I can see that that's a very good thing. We do have some situations where Joe feels a lot of ownership over an area.
Right.
That is a potential source of drama.
Yes, it is. And I think that's one of those great, and trust me, this is not unique to your congregation. That's one of those opportunities where the non-anxious leader can be compassionate and kind and brave in helping Joe to relinquish ownership of these jobs so that the congregation can move forward. Because as long as one person has that job by the throat, no one else is ever going to be able to have it. And when they can't do it anymore, then nobody knows how. I mean, I knew a congregation once where there was only one person who knew how to use the furnace. And if the furnace broke, they were stuck. So that's one of those times for the non-anxious and courageous leader to be able to institute some of those things that move from people to roles. And if you want to blame me, go ahead. Say, I went to this webinar and they said we needed to do this in order to thrive.
Reverend Scher told us to do this.
That's right. Thanks. Ellensburg seems to have their hand raised as well.
Yes, they do.
Hello, Ellensburg.
Oh, did they go away?
They raised their hand.
I know they did, but I don't see them anymore.
Uh-oh.
Hopefully they'll come back. And let's see if somebody else has a hand.
There's an actual hand where it says red tail up.
Retail up?
Yeah.
Oh, they have unmuted themselves. Retail up, you want to share? And tell us who you are.
I can't hear you, I'm afraid. Maybe you need to unmute yourself.
There we go.
Chris?
Ah.
Did that work?
A little bit.
Yes, you're very quiet.
Okay, we can probably talk like this. Is that better?
Yeah, that is better.
Okay.
How are you, Ellensburg?
Lean in close. Okay, this is Grants Pass.
Okay, I know you're Grants Pass.
Hi. We are newly in our own building and seeing both a shift in identity that is for the congregation as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you have any particular feedback, suggestions for dealing with being a small congregation, a family-sized congregation in their own building, but without a minister.
Okay, that's an excellent question. Moving from not having your own building to having your own building is a really big deal. Like you didn't know that. And the most important thing you can do is to build in structures that are not rigid but formalized about things like who opens the door, who has keys, who pays the insurance bill, things like that. So it's not one of those, I thought you did it, oh, I thought you did it. This is an opportunity to build in some of those clear and respectful policies and procedures so that when you do get bigger, they're already in place, because it's very difficult to go back and scramble later and get building use policies in place after you've had a building with no building use policies. I mean, you can imagine how hard that would be to come back and do 10 years from now. So while it's brand new, this is a great time to institute clear, compassionate, not rigid, but accountable building use policies that everybody knows where they are and everybody knows where to find them. And also, again, some of the business that goes along with owning a building. I mean, I wasn't being facetious when I talked about, I thought you did that, I thought you did that. There's a congregation I know who had a crisis where they needed to call on their insurance, And they thought that everybody thought somebody else had paid it. It turned out nobody had. That's a problem. So this is a time to make sure that your policies and procedures around how you live in your building and how you care for your building and how you pay for your building and all those things are nice and tidy and as drama-free as possible. And this is, again, one of those opportunities to be brave and kind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have reached the end of our time. It is now 8 o'clock. So Sarah, would you like to say some things to wrap us up?
I would like to remind us all what really important work we do as Unitarian Universalists, that we are called upon to heal a hurting world in a way that very few other organizations can. So I would like to honor the work of congregations of all sizes, including the little tiny ones of 10 to 15 people, because the work we have to do is holy and important work that really nobody else can do. So thank you so much for carrying our flame into the world and for doing this important work of saving humanity. Thanks.
And just to let everyone know, we are going to be archiving the video of this webinar along with the slideshow on our website, uua.org/PWR. And you will be able to find this information to replay again. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.